Hello everyone, and welcome back to my YouTube channel. In today's video, I'll be showing you how to make both variations of these summer shorts. Both of these are going to be made to fit you specifically and have tons of sizing alterations throughout the video to help it fit you, just in case you don't look exactly like me. This is a pretty simple tutorial, but for the parts that are a little bit harder, I take it nice and slow and break it down step by step. And of course, you can always reach out to me on Instagram and go there as well to look at the free written pattern to follow along with the video. Let's get right on into it. For your materials today, you're going to need either a weight 3 or 4 yarn to go with either a 5mm hook or a smaller one for smaller yarn, or slightly larger if you want larger holes. You also need a pair of scissors, as well as a stitch marker, or a few if that helps, a needle if that helps you as well, and if you want the written pattern, I have that up on my Instagram totally for free, so you can go along with that as we go through the video. So we are going to be beginning this project with the hem. So you want your hem for both the top part, which we're working on first, and the bottoms of the legs, which we'll do last, to be the same color. So this will be the main color of your piece. So the first step to this project is to make a slip knot. Now if you've never made one before, I'm going to show you really slowly, but if you have, you can skip to the little times down there. So you would like to start with your non-dominant hand, holding the tail end with your thumb and your index finger. Using your other hand, which is my right hand in this case, you're going to form this little oval shape and then make a pinching motion with your right hand. So basically you have this little oval or half circle, and you're going to use your pinched fingers to push it through and then spin it away from yourself to create a figure 8. This is going to have 2 loops, one on top and one on the bottom. You want to grab the piece of yarn that is underneath with your right hand, grab it, pull it through, and secure that in place to make your slip knot. You're next just going to take your hook and insert that loop directly onto the hook, holding your hook, by the way, with your right hand or your dominant hand. When you tighten the hook, or when you tighten your yarn by pulling the tail end of it, you don't want to make it so tight that it can no longer move against your hook. You just want to tighten it nice and light so that way it's nice and secure. With that, you want to hold your yarn with your other hand, and the way that I do it is up and over my index finger, and I create tension by using my thumb and middle finger to pull on the tail end. So obviously, if you're experienced, you can do this however you want, but if you haven't before, I recommend you try doing it this way. It'll make it a little bit easier as we go on for the beginning, and it has a lot of capacity to move faster and faster the more you practice. Our next step is to begin chaining the length around your waist or hips, depending on how high-waisted you want these to be. So what we need to decide first is where you're taking your measurement. Either take it at the length of your hips or where your low-rise pants would fall, or all the way up at the curve of your waist. Once you have that measurement, you're going to begin making chains. So again, if you know what you're doing at this point, just go on without me. But if you've never made a chain before, I'm going to show you nice and slow. The premise is to wrap the hook around the yarn like this. Make sure that you twist it as you are pulling through, and then actually pull through the loop that you are holding with your hand. So we call this yarning over, because what you're technically doing is placing the yarn over top of your hook, then you twist it, and then you pull through, and that's how you make your chain. I want to recommend to you guys, as you go through making your chains, that you take them nice and slow, and that you're not pulling very tightly on the yarn as you're going. You want these chains to be a little bit loose, because you don't want your hem to be super tight. We want it to be nice and flowy and puffy when it's done. You're now just simply going to make a chain long enough to fit you. I gave a size chart like I showed before, so that way you have a small reference. Again, it's not going to be perfect for everybody. Just measure it up against yourself as you go. I also wanted to give you a small zoom in here, so that way you can see what the chain looks like up close. These pieces should be slightly braided in the front and a little bit bumpy in the back, so long as yours looks somewhat like mine does. Even if it's a little bit looser, no worries, you are on the right track. Once your chain is done, it should look like this, just a super long braided rope. And once you're done with this, I want you to measure it against yourself one more time. Make sure that everything looks the way you want it to before we move on to actually beginning to build the hem itself. So again, reference the size chart here, just in case you don't want a hem to be as big or small as mine. And what we're going to be doing is building up rows and rows of double crochets, then folding it over itself. And that's going to create this puffier, almost sweatpants-like sort of look. So like I said, we're going to start with the double crochet. If it helps you, this is a time where I would recommend using a stitch marker. If you have one and if you want to use one, you can use it to insert into the last chain that you made. This will help you keep your spot when I show you how to do the turning chain in just a second. So use your stitch marker or bobby pin or whatever it is you're using if you're opting in. And then you are going to make 2 turning chains. These are the same thing as a normal chain, you are just doing 2 more of them. And what this does is it gives you space to create your double crochet without it losing the length that you made originally. And once you're done with those 2, now you know to go back into the stitch with the stitch marker in it to begin your first double crochet. So to make a double crochet, you want to start by yarning over like you were going to make a chain, but this time insert your hook into the hole that you want to go into. So push it straight through. From there, you want to yarn over again. So you will have 3 loops on your hook, yarn over, which makes it look like there's 4, and then pull it through just the first one so you go back to having 3 loops on your hook. From there, you're going to yarn over and pull through 2 of those loops, and only 2, leaving 2 left, then yarn over again and pull through the remaining 2 loops. And that is how you make a double crochet. So we're going to do a few more, for example, but if you use a stitch marker, I recommend you take it out here just so it's out of your way. Again, if it's helpful for you, you can place that double crochet right above the last stitch we made, just so you can mark your spot a little bit better when we turn our rows around. But again, it's not necessary. So continuing into our next stitch, we're going to do the exact same steps again. So you're going to start by doing your yarn over, insert into the stitch you want to go into, yarn over again and pull through 1, yarn over again and pull through 2, and then finish by yarning over and going through 2 more. And that is your double crochet. You are now just going to continue making these all the way down your row of chains. So whatever number you chained originally, let's say it was 90 for example, you are going to have 90 double crochets when you reach the other side of the row. So go all the way down and I will meet you there to show you the next step. Once you have reached the end, you should have a nice long piece that looks just like this. It's a nice thicker cord, and the double crochet should be pretty much even in every single row. What you're going to do when you get to the end here is we're going to start by adding 2 more of those turning chains, just like we did at the very beginning. So same thing, just chain 1 time, then chain another. Now you want to turn your entire piece around so you can continue working into it the correct direction. Now you're simply going to be adding more double crochets into this row. What's important to find the differences between is the holes that you want to now put your double crochets into. As you can see here, these little braids look like an arrow pointing to the right side, or towards where your hook is. You want to make sure that you are going into those, and not the ones on top, which looks like arrows pointing to the left. You always want to go into the hole where the arrow is pointing to the right. So continuing on, you're going to do your double crochets the exact same way we were doing them, going all the way down your row until you reach the last stitch. This is going to build up the length of the hem, so I'm going to meet you again at the very end of this row to show you how to finish it off. So if you place a stitch marker like I showed you before, it'll be easier to identify where this stitch is as opposed to if you were just eyeballing it. So as you can see, this little triangle diagonal braided piece here is facing upwards and to the right. It's just at a weird angle. So even when we remove the stitch marker from that stitch, it'll still be easy to see, but you just have to know that you are going to be looking at a piece slightly different than the ones we were just going into. So just make sure you don't skip that double crochet. And again, you want to make sure you have the same amount in each row. So if you need to count, that's totally fine, but you shouldn't have to. Now from there, the rest of it is up to you and how thick you want your hem to be. If we only did 1 row, it would be skinny like that. So I want you to add either 4 more or up to 8 more rows of double crochet, depending on just how big and thick you want this hem to be. I'm personally adding 5 total rows, so 3 more from here, because I don't want a super thick waistband, I just want one that's going to look nice. So once we finish our rows for the hem, I'm going to meet you back here and show you how to start building the shorts. So I've zoomed you out so you can see the full scope of this thing so far. We now have what is going to be the perfect size for our waistband, and we can start adding the rows to actually build the shorts themselves next. The general way we're formatting this piece is by folding the sides over like this, so we can add in 2 separate legs and a hem in the back without having any weird lines on the sides. So if you guys want the second windowed type pattern, you can skip to the time frame down here, because what I'm going to show you first is how to do the color switch pattern in the orange and green shorts. So the premise for this one is we're doing the same stitch over and over and over again, just doing a ton of double crochets all the way down for as many rows as we need. I want you to start by using either a stitch marker here or just keeping track of how many rows you did for your hem. So I know for me that it was 5, but I'm putting the stitch marker here just so I have an idea in my mind. Now continuing, What we want to do first is add one totally normal green double crochet. There should be nothing different about this one, just make it the same way like you were starting another row. Into the second stitch here is where we're going to make our first color switch. So to do a color switch, you are going to start by doing your double crochet totally normal. You are going to yarn over, insert your hook through, yarn over, pull through 1, then yarn over, pull through 2. Now where we would go to pull through 2 again, we're instead going to take our next color yarn and use that to pull through with instead. So I'm using this bright orange here. I just had a vision with these two colors. And the way that we're going to do this is replicate it as if it was the yarn you were already using. So hold it the way I'm doing here, and then pull through with your next color like this. Now what you're going to be doing is doing one double crochet with your orange and then doing another color switch. So these are going to be in blocks of 2. You want to make sure that you've pulled tightly on both of your yarn tails to lock everything in place. And then what you want to do, and this is very important to keep track of, is keep your tail pieces to the front. So I'm first going to tuck in this orange one here just so it's out of the way, but as we're color switching back and forth, we want to always pull the color we're not using towards ourselves. So now as you can see, I'm just making this double crochet normally, but I'm showing you that the orange yarn in between is getting tucked in like this, so just pull tight and make sure you orient it this way. Make your second double crochet afterwards, making sure that you do your pull through 1, pull through 2, and now we're going to start doing our next color. So again, on your second pull through 2, you will use your green, or again, whatever color you were using, and then make sure again that you pull the color you are not using into the front, so that way you don't have any weird lines on either side. One side will look super crisp, the side that is on the inside out part of your shorts will have all the color switches. And you are just going to continue this pattern all the way down your row, doing your green square and then your orange square. Basically, it'll just be normal double crochet, one with a color switch. So do that all the way down, and please do not hesitate to reach out to me if you have any questions. I'm more than happy to help. And just so you guys know, it will look like this on the other side once we're done with the piece. Now once you've worked your way down the row, you'll have all these little blocks adding up at the ends. So what we're going to do is if you ended with your orange or your second color, you want to make sure that you are switching back to your main color for the ends. If you're like me and you happen to end on your main color, you just want to continue your squares normally. So just do your last double crochet, no matter what you're doing, just like this, and then make sure you switch to your next color for your next row, because we want to do a checkered pattern, so they are going to have to switch back and forth. Do your chain 2, and then if you're using a stitch marker, you can add that. If not, just flip your work. And then now you'll be facing the other side like this. You should have a really nice view of what your piece is going to look like. So now that we have done our color switch, we want to make sure that everything lines up the same way. So make sure now that your color switching is happening in the back of your piece, so that way we have the front, this nice checkered pattern as you see here, and the back the same way. So we are going to now start with our orange, or again your second color yarn, going over top of the last square that you made. So that way the colors are alternating. The pattern is the same. You are going to do your color switch into your second double crochet, and if you want to copy the way I'm holding the yarn in the back, just make sure that you're keeping your strings behind the piece. Now we're going to have green and orange switching back and forth again, and that your patterns are lining over top of each other, rather than having oranges on top of each other, greens on top of each other. You are just going to continue making rows like this until you find the spot that you want it to fit on your own body. So I'm going to give you another size chart so that way you can have a good estimate of where you should or shouldn't go. But again, as you are adding more rows, just line it up against yourself and see if you like how long it is. And again, just reach out to me if you need help with your sizing. This is a pretty good rough estimate, but you might need more or less depending on how you're built. If you want to do your windowed pattern, we're going to be starting here. And as you can see, I'm using white for this piece just because I wanted to differentiate. After you do your hem, what we're going to be doing to form the windows is starting with the base chain. So rather than just chaining 2 to go up, you're going to chain 3 times because we need to make the bridge between windows, which will make sense in a second. So after you've done your chain of 3, you want to skip the first 2 stitches. That's because the chain that we just made counts for 1. We want to skip the chain in the middle, and then we want to place our next double crochet into the following stitch. And this is going to create these tiny little windows that create these nice mesh patterns. And as you will see, you have this really cute little window shape here. It should be pretty much a perfect square. When you are done, and how you're going to continue down your row is by chaining 1, skipping 1 stitch, and then placing your double crochet into the next stitch. And essentially these chains are acting as the top part of a double crochet, and then you just have the window where the full double crochet would have gone. So you're just going to work all the way down your piece, doing a chain, then a double crochet, then a chain, then a double crochet. And if you want to see the size chart that I showed for the last part of the pattern, just hit the link right here, go back in the video so you can see how many rows you need. And from there you're just going to continue all the way down your piece, going row by row. To do another row, whenever you reach the end of it, you are simply going to go back to chaining 3, skipping 2 stitches, and then placing your double crochet. So regardless of which pattern that you used, we are now at the bottom of the length of our shorts. And the next step that we want to do is separate the legs into 2 separate pieces so we can sew everything together afterwards. So I'm flipping things over just to show you. These look like little hearts if you chose that pattern. I thought that was really cute. And I want to zoom you guys out so we can get a really good view of what we're actually going to be doing for the leg division steps. So essentially, if you remember I showed you earlier, we're folding both of the sides inwards like this, so that way we can have the back seam, which will be really important later when we're adding some space for the back side. So for now, you want to make sure that things line up pretty well, and we want to start to divide our legs at this point up here. Basically, we're going to spread off into 2 separate leg holes, so that way we don't have to sew different pieces on together. This is all getting done in one shot. Again, if this helps you guys, you can throw some stitch markers in here. They're totally not necessary, but my recommended placement for some beginners is to make sure your hems are together, your bottoms are together, and then we're going to show you where the legs themselves spread into 2 spots. So now I've zoomed you guys in here so I can show you how to actually start your first leg hole. And what we're simply going to do is take whatever color that you ended on and use chains to actually make a larger gap for your legs to fit through. So again, this is going to be one of those things where I can't say chain 5, chain 10, you're going to chain the amount that you need. And it helps if it is a number divisible by 2, so that way you can have an even amount of checkers. But again, if it doesn't look perfect, it'll be hard to see this point anyways. So once you make your chain, you want to go into your marked stitch, which was where the middle was here, that I'm pointing out. We're going to do a slip stitch, which is simply where you insert your hook through, and then pull through all 3 loops on your hook with 1 yarn over. So be very gentle there, and that's now going to connect your legs to make one big hole. You're now just going to continue the same pattern that we did to actually build up the body of the shorts all around these leg holes. So it would still just be your alternating little checkers here and there, and then you also want to account for the fact that you have that new chain. So for example, if you watch me, I'm going to be doing my orange over my green, green over my orange all the way around. It will also be really helpful for you to make sure that you cut the yarn of whatever color you didn't chain with and just reattach it. So what we're doing here for me is using my green. When it's time for my first color switch, I'm just cutting the yarn and reattaching it here, just so there's no weird long strands of yarn lying around. When you make it around to your chain, you want to make sure that you are not skipping anything and you are just going into every stitch the same way you did here. So it'd still just be 2 orange, 2 green, no differences. And you're going to go around continuing that pattern over and over until you have 3 total rows of shorts. So at the end of each of those rows, you just want to do a slip stitch like I showed you with the chain before. And then you're just going to go row 1, row 2, and row 3. And now once your rows are done, you will have a piece that looks like this. Simply you have a larger hole for your legs than what half of the piece was earlier. And then what we're going to do now is actually add the hem of your piece using something called increases. So I want to make sure that I'm using my green here because I want my hems to match each other. Again, that is my recommended, but if you want to have like different color top and bottom hems, you can do that too. So I'm just switching off my orange yarn here, doing my slip stitch over to green, chaining 2, and then I'm going to do a little snip on the orange yarn just to get it out of my way. From there, what I want to do is start going all the way around, doing normal double crochets once again. I'm marking the 4 corners of the short leg, so those 4 even points around the circle, using some stitch markers because those are the stitches I'll be doing my increases in. And now what we want to actually do for an increase is place 1 double crochet normally. I'm showing you in this first stitch, which will be increase 1. So I'm just doing a regular double crochet, and instead of moving to my next stitch, an increase happens when you're placing 2 of the same stitch into the same stitch. So 2 double crochets into that first stitch here. And as you guys can see, it turns that 1 double crochet in the last row into 2 in the next row, and it kind of expands this out a little bit. We're going to continue around in all these other stitches, just going 1 double crochet at a time, and showing you guys again when I get to my first stitch marker, I'm going to be placing 2 double crochets into that stitch. And because I want 2 rows of increases for my hem, I'm going to take out my double crochet stitch marker, place it in the one above it, and now I know for the next row where to put my increase. So you guys are going to continue that all the way around. Make sure you're doing increases where you need them. Try it on as you go, and I will meet you back here when we're done to finish off the hem. Once you've gotten to the bottom of your hem, we are going to finally cut our first piece of yarn and end off this part of the piece. So simply do a chain of just 1 and then leave a small yarn tail that we're going to weave in later. To actually knot that in place, you're going to very gently pull up with your hook to create a small knot just like this. Tighten it up like so, and then your knot is totally done. So we're essentially doing the exact same thing that we just did, we're just going to put it onto the other leg. So to do so, I've put you back to this view that we were at earlier. I'm going to start with my orange yarn once again and make 1 slip knot. Then I want to insert my hook first into that stitch that we were going into earlier. So that's our corner stitch for the bottom leg. Insert your slip knot onto the hook, tighten it up and pull it through, and now you have your yarn reattached. And now all you're going to do is the exact same steps that we did the last time to actually make the second leg. You're going to do your chain of however many you did the first time, same amount of rows, and same hem, cut it all off, and I'll meet you here when we're done. Now if you are anything like me, your piece is going to look like this. Basically this little rectangular bit cut out from the back. That's because my legs are much wider than my hips when they put together, so I need some extra space to fill up the backside region. This might not be happening to you. You might not have that space here. If that's the case, you can just sew it up and meet me at the time marker here. Now, of course, though, this is not going to be for everybody. A lot of us are going to have some extra space in the back that we need to fill up, no matter how big or small. So what I want you to do from here is first actually try on your piece so we can see what that looks like up against your body. So I've decided to show you because it makes it a little bit easier. As you guys can see, the front fits totally perfect. After we flip the hems over, it'll be nice and short. It'll fit exactly the way we want it. I threw some shorts on so you can see the back, but as you can see, it literally makes like a triangle shape. So what we need to do is go and do a small row here, slightly larger, slightly larger, slightly larger, all the way down to the bottom. So of course, you might be shaped differently than me, so we're going to make it work for everybody, but I'm going to show you what I did for my pair specifically and give you another chart of things that might work for you. So to be filling up our cone, the first thing that we're going to do, if it fit you the same way it did for me, is just make sure that we put stitch markers on that top hem, so that way we know not to add any increases there. Of course, if you need a larger hem, add more rows in this part, but for me, it was pretty much perfectly fitted to my waist, and it should be the same for a lot of you guys since you measured that originally. So you should just be able to ignore the sides of the hem and just shut it like this. Now we know not to touch it as we move through the rest of the piece. Once we get to the actual triangle down here, I'm going to have you guys flip your work over, and we're going to start working from the smallest to the largest rows. So I'm zooming you guys in, and I'm sorry if it's harder to see the colors now that the background is the same color as the yarn, but we're going to start with a slip knot, and then by inserting our hook into the bottom of the hem. So I'm moving that 1 stitch marker that I placed a little bit further down just so it's out of the way, and you guys are going to go into the stitch first, same way we did with the legs before. So insert your hook through the very last stitch of the hem, then put your actual slip knot through like this to connect your yarn, and now you're going to begin to make just 2 chains so that way we can connect it to the other side. We're doing only 2 chains because that lets us make 1 extra color in between the 2 rows, so that way it's like slowly but surely filling up space in the back. Since we want this to be form-fitted, we have to move this very slowly and carefully, so that way we don't end up with a lot of loose space in the back. What I'm going to do next is begin making slip stitches up the sides of the double crochets, so that way it's not a weird overlap with a bunch of extra gaps and yarn hanging in different directions. So watch really carefully here as I insert my hook through the side of this green double crochet here. Simply I'm inserting my hook through just 1 of those loops, yarning over and pulling through 2, and then I'm going to do it again for that top stitch as well, yarning up through just through the side, pulling the yarn through and pulling it all the way through. I'm going to flip my work back around and zoom you guys back out so we can move on to the actual first insertion of an extra square. So the way we make our little squares is the same. You're going to start by doing your first double crochet into that first chain that we made, and then do the same into the next stitch. I'm going to be doing my color switch into the side here instead of into the stitch itself. It's not going to make too much of a difference at this point, but it will later when we start making bigger rows. So I'm grabbing my green, or again, you can grab whatever your main color yarn was, and you're going to begin to do your color switch, and then once again, slip stitch up the side of the double crochet. And I've changed the view a little bit here just because I think it makes it a little easier to see. We're once again going to go up the side, and then turn our work all the way around once more. And now this is where the rows get a little bit more intricate. We need to fit 3 of these squares into the space where we only had 1 square in the last row, because we want to, like I said, make it slowly bigger and bigger. So I'm going to start by inserting my first double crochet into this first stitch here. Just doing it totally normal, no color switches or anything else yet. I'm then placing my second double crochet into the same stitch, basically doing an increase, just making sure that I switch to my other color afterwards, so that way the color switch happens into the next stitch. I'm then going to be placing 2 more double crochets into the following stitch here, making sure once again that I do my color switch. And then into that last stitch here, where it's not really the top of anything, it's just that like combining stitch from orange to green, I'm going to be doing 2 more double crochets to create a third switch. So simply, I'm just doing 1 double crochet here, and then adding in 1 more afterwards. I'm going to do my color switch into this stitch here before I connect it to the other side of the row. So we're now working with our orange again, and then we are going to slip stitch straight on through, not going up through anything on that side, just slip stitching the row back together. So I'm going to keep continuing doing this pattern. In our next row, we are going to do our slip stitch up the side again, carefully pulling the pieces apart and going up that green stitch. Then once again, turning my work around so I can get ready to add in my next bit of double crochets. This will be the last example row here because the rest are going to be the same thing over and over again. I'm just going to be fitting in double crochets, working in increases onto the further out stitches, and making sure that everything else is still switching back and forth. Again, the checkers aren't going to be totally perfect since we have to add increases here, so don't worry about the overlap too much. I promise when you actually have the piece on, you can barely tell because of how much color switching is already happening. If this part is really hard for you to understand, maybe you're way new to crochet and you're having a hard time, please let me know and I can send smaller videos or maybe post a short with an even slower explanation if that's what's needed. But essentially, you're just going to be doing your color switching row, going up to the next row, doing your 2 extra double crochets on the outside, going to the next row and doing the same thing. However, you might not need to have a bigger row consecutively each time, so you might not need 1 square, 3 squares, 5 squares, 7 squares. You might need like 1 squares, then 4 rows of 3 squares, then 1 row of 5 squares. You have to make it so it fits your body, which I'm always happy to help do as you're moving through your piece. So continue to do what you can do. Please reach out to me if you need help, and I'll meet you back here to close off the bottom of the row. I'm here now with my little cone totally finished, and as you guys can see, there's a little bit of spacing in between, but we're going to take care of that in a little bit. For now, I'm going to show you first how to use a darning needle to sew up this bottom portion. So after I've threaded my needle, I'm slowly going to go in and out of only the back parts of these stitches, as you can see I'm doing here. Basically just pulling it through and leaving a little bit of a tail on the end so we can weave it in later. Now I'm doing what's essentially a running stitch. It's a little different just because of the material and whatnot. Now I'm going to go in through the same row on the top, going through the only back stitches, and the same on the bottom, going only through the back stitches. This is just because we don't want to see the other sides of it when we're like flipping the piece inside out. We want everything to just be sewn really tight together without any visual knowledge that it was sewn up. So I'm going to keep going all the way down, going straight up and down, back and forth, until I've reached the other end of this piece, and then I'm going to show you guys how to go up and down the sides. First though, I want to let you know if you are using a hook, you can do the exact same thing by inserting your hook through the back stitches only, both through the top and through the bottom before you use your yarn. And again, as you can see, it's kind of more difficult to do it this way, but totally doable. Then just pull all the way up with your yarn, very gently so you don't tug on anything. And there you go. So you can just do the exact same thing with your hook if that's all you have. Now to begin moving up the sides, you're going to do the exact same thing. Be sure to only move through the back stitches and just slowly sew it up. So any spot you have a little bit of gapping, just grab one side from both ends of the gap, go through only the back parts of those 2 stitches, and continue it all the way around. I recommend shoving your hand in through the leg hole like I did here, just so that way you don't accidentally sew both the front and back together. That's just a little tip. If you're good at sewing, you probably won't need to do that, but just go all the way around. Once you're done, like I am here, we are going to close off the yarn by cutting it with a small tail, and then doing one of two things. You can either tie your knots together, like I'm showing you here first, doing a double knot so that way nothing comes undone, and then you can just trim off the ends if you want to do it the easy way. This obviously takes 2 seconds and it's much quicker and simpler. You could, however, also use your hook and tie a knot like I'm doing here, basically making a bunch of chains to knot things together and pull them through. Then again, use your scissors and trim your yarn. We now want to sew the actual hems themselves, so that way we can move on to the final part of the piece, which is actually much easier than what we just did sewing up the back. So essentially what we need to do first is fold our hem over, and you can decide whether you want yours folded inwards or outwards. If you want to copy the way I'm doing it, I recommend you do it like this. So you want to start by flipping your piece inside out, and then once you're done like this, you'll be able to flip your hem upwards, and it's going to create this little cuff sort of look. I'm going to use stitch markers to hold it in place. Again, you do not need them. You can just hold it and count if you need to. Stitch markers just will make this a little bit easier. I'm going to thread my needle, this time with green yarn, and again, you can do this with your hook if needed, and begin to sew all the way around the hem, just through that top stitch, straight through the back of the piece. Make sure you are not going through both hems at the same time, or you're going to sew your legs together. You just want to make sure that you are sewing the hem down onto the pant leg. Leave yourself a small tail, same way as we did before, and then you're going to continue going around back to front and front to back on this piece. Zoom you guys in so you can get a better angle. You're going to go in through the top of the hem like this, come out the back of the hem like this, and then just very gently pull on your piece of yarn as you go around. Make sure you're not knotting anything, and make sure you're not going around the hem. So like if you were going through the back, coming around to go through to the back again, you want to do it exactly how I'm doing it here. And then so long as you're pretty gentle and going across, you will have no weird overlaps or ruffles. That's why I use the stitch markers. It helps me keep track a little bit better. So don't worry about things being perfectly even or needing to count. Just make sure you are following the natural shape of your legs. And again, if you've never sewn before, please reach out to me and I'll show you a little bit slower how to do this part. To finish off the top hem, we need to start by sewing up that last piece in the back if you didn't do so when you were adding your expansion rows. So I'm going to take out my stitch markers. Again, if you didn't use them, ignore this step. And I'm going to grab my threaded yarn and begin going from the bottom all the way up to the top. So I'm going to make sure I'm going through the double crochets for when I'm sewing here, not in between them, because that's not going to make it as strong of a hold. So go through your double crochets first, the way I'm showing you here. And then because we want to make sure that the bottom is fully in place, we're going to leave a small tail and then go up through the bottom stitches I'm showing you here. Basically the parts where you started the body of your piece. When you pull these nice and tight, you'll be able to form a nicer and stronger knot, so you won't have to worry nearly as much. You can then begin going through the double crochets, going higher and higher up your hem until you've sewn it all together. Again, make sure you are pulling gently so that way you do not unweave the piece. Once you have a nice base, you can knot it up like this, and then again just continue going back and forth through these double crochets until you reach the top of your hem. Once you get to the top, you are going to do the exact same thing that we did for the leg parts. Just fold the top over, place your stitch markers if you would like them there, and then begin sewing it all the way around. As you can see, we have a cute little dip in the back, and that's going to give us a nice little detail, so make sure your piece has that on it. To finish up here, we are just going to create the drawstring that we can weave through the top of the shorts. So you just want to start with a simple slip knot, and then make a chain equal to the amount you started with, plus a minimum of 50 extra chains. So this is so that way we can go not only just around the piece, but to also have the part to tie up in the front. 50 chains will give you a pretty small tie. I went up to I think 100 for mine, but you can do whatever you feel most comfortable with and just adjust it as you make it. You can also trim your little end pieces to look like little shoelace aglets or like sweatpants aglets on the bottom. Shout out Phineas and Ferb for that word. But you can just trim them nice and even with each other so it'll look a little bit more clean and polished as opposed to just leaving these two longer strands at the end. To actually weave them in, I'm going to use my hook here, and I'm going to start with the part that I know is the very front. I'm going to move a little bit to the left and begin inserting my hook through the hem itself. So not to the back of the pants, we just want to go through the actual hem. So as you can see, I have 2 double crochets in my hook here. I'm then going to actually pull the strand through. I'm then going to start weaving through the same thing, going through just 2 double crochets at a time and skipping 2 double crochets in between. So as you guys can see, your pattern should look like this as you go around. Do that all the way around and then you'll be finished. Thank you all so much for watching today's video. I really hope you enjoy your new shorts and you get to enjoy them all summer long. I make new videos on the first of the month every month, and you can also follow me on social media at any of the links up on the left. Thank you again, and enjoy your project. Bye-bye!